Welcome to stop number 2 on the Georgia Pacific Chlor-Alkali Area Remedial Action Area Virtual Tour. I'm Eleanor Hines, Northbound Baykeeper, Lead Scientist with Resources. For this stop, we are standing just inside the gate. If you are at the site, you can look through the lock gate and see the area that we will be talking about. I'm here to tell you more about the MTCA, or Model Toxics Control Act process. On July 6th through August 4th of 2021 is an open comment period on the Draft Cleanup Action Plan and amended legal agreement called an Agreed Order, all part of the MTCA process. Concurrent with this comment period, but also part of a separate process, is the State Environmental Protection Act Determination of Non-Significance. So, you may want to know a little more about MTCA. Stay tuned for the last stop on this virtual tour for more details on how you can stay up to speed with what's happening at this site, other sites, and how you can participate in the public comment process. MTCA was passed as a Washington State Citizens Initiative in 1988 with the intent of speeding up the cleanups of our state's legacy contaminated sites. Today, Bellingham Bay has 12 MTCA sites, the GP West site here being one of those. The MTCA process starts with what's called site discovery. Someone has to first identify that a property may be contaminated and report it to the Washington State Department of Ecology. Ecology then conducts what's called an initial investigation to evaluate the potential risk of human health and the environment based on exposure potential and severity of the hazard. For example, was a reported oil sheen the result of a leaking underground storage tank, or was it just a few drops of oil spilled? The initial investigation determines if or what further steps may need to be taken if there is human or environmental risk. The next step is then to conduct a remedial investigation to determine the nature and extent of contamination and define the site. Next, a feasibility study is conducted to evaluate cleanup options for the site. These steps combined are referred to as the RIFS. This work is typically done by consultants that work with ecology and the potential liable persons, or PLPs, who play a major role in the cleanup process. The PLPs are required by law to do the cleanup while ecology oversees the entire cleanup process for compliance with the law. Here, the Port of Bellingham is cleaning up the site. Many times, the RI and the FS are combined into a single report and put out for public comment, though not always. In the case of GP West, the site was split into 2 remedial action areas after the remedial investigation, with the intent to speed up the cleanup process, which is discussed more in stop number 3. The pulp and tissue mill area of the GP West site already completed its cleanup in 2016. The RI looks at the nature and extent of contamination, i.e., where the contamination is located and may have traveled to, as well as the potential impacts to human health and the environment. During this process, the site boundaries are defined based on the extent and concentrations of contaminants tied to the identified historical uses or sources. Here, the contamination was determined to be derived from the historical processes involved with various Georgia Pacific paper mill practices that were discussed in the previous introduction video. More specifically, this area included GP's chlor-alkali plant, which produced bleach for white paper and included mercury in this process, being the source of mercury contamination at both the GP West upland site and the Whatcom Waterway sediment site. In the FS, a number of cleanup alternatives are evaluated. Each cleanup alternative must meet the MTCA standards, meaning that they all clean up and address contaminant exposure to ensure human health and environmental protection. These cleanup alternatives usually range from simply placing a cap or a barrier over the contamination or treating contamination in place to full removal and off-site disposal of contamination with variations in between. What's called a preferred alternative is selected from the list of cleanups based on the disproportionate cost analysis that identifies which cleanup plan will get the most protection and benefits for the money spent on the cleanup. During the public comment period, folks can comment on these alternatives and ecology will address each comment submitted in the process, as already happened for this site. During this process, for the GP West site, 9 cleanup alternatives were evaluated, and Alternative 4 was selected by Ecology as the preferred alternative and remained so after the public comment period. The draft cleanup action plan that documents Ecology's cleanup decision is the next step and also has a public comment period. The Alternative 4 cleanup plan from the FS is described in finer detail in the draft cleanup action plan. As mentioned earlier, there is a public comment period open for this draft cleanup action plan and is why we are hosting this virtual tour. We hope that you'll gain a better sense of the site and submit your comment. John Gunther from the Department of Ecology, Brian Guran from the Port of Bellingham, and Steve Germain from Aspect Consulting, the port's consultant, will talk more about what the cleanup action plan entails in the upcoming steps on this virtual tour. After addressing public comments and finalizing the cleanup action plan, the next step is to refine the cleanup action in even more detail with the engineering design report, which dives deeper into the details of construction for the cleanup plan. Following the engineering design report is the preparation of a construction bid package, including detailed technical plans and specifications for the port to solicit competitive bids from qualified contractors to do the construction, while also going through permitting with local and state agencies as required. And finally, the actual cleanup where construction happens on site to get the site cleaned up. The final cleanup will be done under another legal agreement, which is also to be available for public review and comment. Once the site has been cleaned up, monitoring and site use controls are then implemented. Monitoring makes sure that the cleanup action worked as intended, while site use controls restrict and prohibit activities that could disturb the integrity of the cleanup. And finally, periodic reviews, typically every 5 years after the cleanup, are done to ensure the cleanup continues to meet MACA standards and requirements. These periodic reviews are also open for public comment and review. If these are met, then the next step is to remove the site from the hazardous site list. During any time during the MACA process, what's called an interim action may occur to partially address contamination. The interim actions conducted in 2011 to 2014 as well as in 2017 for this site will be talked about during the next stop on this tour, where Kirsten will talk with Brian Guran from the Port of Bellingham about this site and its interim action. So keep following the tour to learn more.